The ER doors never stop spinning. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead as the night surge hits ambulances stacked 3 deep, gurneys lining the hallway like dominoes waiting to fall. In the middle of this chaos, a system update blinks across every terminal: payment records not found. 300 patient accounts. Gone. Not deleted, erased with surgical precision, the kind that leaves no fingerprints but plenty of debt. Clara Winslow feels it first. Her login timestamp shows 2:47 a.m., but she was holding a dying man's hand in triage at 2:47 a.m. Someone wore her digital skin. Someone framed the poor to protect the rich. And somewhere in the maintenance tunnels, Wesley Hargrove pushes his mop bucket past the donor wing, past the marble floors and the oil paintings, his grease-stained fingers trailing along a wall panel that shouldn't sound hollow. He doesn't flinch when finance terms float down from executive conversations. He asks careful questions about creditor codes. He knows the smell of fear in this hospital because he built the foundation it stands on, literally, financially, catastrophically. But that truth stays buried until the press conference in the atrium, until Clara stands accused before cameras and donors, until the anonymous donation on the wall becomes the noose that hangs the powerful. They think he's invisible because he's poor. They're about to learn he's the creditor they can't afford to anger. What would you risk to prove the truth when the whole system wants you silent? The surge arrives without warning, a tidal wave of broken bodies and shattered glass. Clara's fingers fly across the intake keyboard, registering names she'll never remember while sirens wail outside. 3 gunshot wounds, 2 cardiac arrests, a child who fell from a balcony all before midnight. The fluorescent lights flicker overhead, casting shadows that seem to breathe. Wesley pushes his maintenance cart through the chaos, his coveralls stained with grease and something darker. He doesn't look at the patients, but he sees everything: the donor wing's private elevator dinging while the public stairwells overflow, the fresh flowers in executive offices while triage runs out of gauze. His steady gaze catalogues the disparity without comment. At 2:15 a.m., the first terminal freezes. Clara taps the screen, curses softly, moves to the next station. By 230, 6 computers display the same crimson error: database sync in progress. By 247, the sync completes and 300 payment records vanish into digital smoke. Not corrupted. Erased. Targeted. Clara doesn't notice immediately. She's too busy lying to a homeless man about wait times, telling him 20 minutes when she knows it'll be 3 hours. The rich don't wait in chairs, they get rooms with views. The poor get her apologies, delivered in a voice hoarse from repeating them. She saves lives with paperwork while the wealthy save face with platinum cards. When she finally checks her terminal, the timestamp hits her like a physical blow. 2:47 a.m. Her login. Her badge number. But she was in the trauma bay then, holding pressure on a teenager's femoral artery, blood soaking through her scrubs while a security camera watched from the corner. The record says she was deleting payment histories. The truth says she was trying to keep someone from bleeding out. Which version will the cameras remember when the donors demand answers? The morning shift brings no relief, only different masks on the same exhaustion. Clara changes in the locker room, scrubbing at bloodstains that won't fade, while her phone buzzes with texts from the oxygen supply company. Her grandmother's tank is running low. The payment didn't process. Again. She finds Wesley in the basement corridor, replacing a ballast in a light fixture that hasn't worked in weeks. He works with methodical precision, his grease-blackened fingers handling delicate wires like a surgeon. When he speaks, his voice stays soft, too soft for the concrete walls around them. "You look like you fought a war," he says. "I lost," Clara replies, leaning against the wall where the paint peels in strips. She tells him about the timestamp, the impossible login, the way her supervisor's eyes slid away when she reported it. Wesley listens without interrupting, his steady gaze fixed on the wiring. But his jaw tightens when she mentions the payment records. "Donor accounts?" He asks, the question casual, his hands never stopping their work. "How did you know?" Clara freezes, suddenly aware of how much she's revealed to a man she barely knows. The hospital hums around them, a machine that consumes the poor and polishes the rich. Wesley caps the wire nuts, tests the switch. The light flickers, holds, illuminates his face in harsh white. Pattern recognition, he says, packing his tools with deliberate slowness. The wealthy protect their own. The poor get timestamps and termination notices. He meets her eyes, and something in his gaze makes her breath catch, not attraction, though that's there too, but recognition. As if he knows exactly how the machinery grinds because he's studied its gears. Clara wants to ask more, but her pager screams. Another surge. Another night of choosing who gets comfort and who gets a cot. She leaves with his words echoing, the wealthy protect their own. But who protects the protectors when the system turns on them? What happens when the maintenance man sees more than the directors? Drake Hollowell arrives at 9 a.m. sharp, his Italian shoes clicking against the marble floors like a metronome of power. He hosts the donor tour himself, shepherding men in bespoke suits through the cardiac wing while nurses hide the supply shortages behind strategically placed curtains. The contrast is architectural crystal chandeliers above, roach traps below. Clara watches from the intake desk, her exhaustion buried under a smile that feels like a wound. She sees Drake's hand on a donor's shoulder, the intimate gesture of shared privilege, while behind the closed doors of supply closet B12, staff count the last boxes of saline. Rich optics. Poor reality. The hospital's true product. Wesley maintains the air handlers on the donor tour route, his presence tolerated because he's invisible. He hears Drake's voice, smooth as pooled oil, we treat everyone with equal dignity here. The lie hangs in the climate-controlled air while Wesley notes the security codes on the finance office doors, the placement of cameras, the rhythm of executive assistants coming and going. Drake spots Clara's gaze and breaks from the group, approaching with predator calm. Ms. Winslow, he says, reading her badge without looking at it. I understand there was a system issue last night. Not a question. An accusation wearing courtesy's mask. These glitches happen when staff are overworked. User error, usually. My login was compromised, Clara says, her voice steadier than her hands. I have witnesses. I was in triage. Drake's smile doesn't reach his eyes. Witnesses can be mistaken. Timestamps rarely are. He glances at her grandmother's emergency contact listed in her file, visible to him, invisible to her rights. Families depend on our accuracy. On our discretion. The thread arrives wrapped in silk, delivered with perfect teeth. He rejoins the donors, laughter trailing behind him like exhaust fumes. Clara stands at her desk, understanding finally that she's not an employee here. She's inventory. Expendable. And somewhere in the building, Wesley Hargrove tightens a valve with more force than necessary, his controlled anger finding mechanical expression. How long can you hold your breath when the air itself belongs to someone else? The maintenance closet smells of ozone and old mop water, a cathedral of forgotten utility. Wesley works by flashlight, his official duties completed, his unofficial investigation beginning. The drop box isn't supposed to exist, a metal receptacle behind the water heater, labeled outgoing invoices in faded tape. He found it by following the paper trail that shouldn't exist. Finance memos shredded but not pulped. Delivery schedules for armored trucks that don't appear on any log. The box contains envelopes, sealed, stamped with codes he recognizes from creditor documentation he shouldn't know. But he does. Intimately. Clara finds him there at 3 a.m., drawn by the light leaking under the door. She should report him. She should walk away. Instead, she enters and closes the door behind her, sealing them in the dark with secrets. What is this place? She whispers. Where the truth gets laundered, Wesley replies, not surprised by her presence. As if he expected her, planned for her, needed her to see. He shows her an envelope, donor funds redirected through patient billing, a carousel of money that enriches the wealthy while burying the poor in unpayable debt. The codes repeat across unrelated accounts. A signature. A system. Clara's hands shake as she holds the paper. This is fraud. This is she stops, the reality crashing through her professional distance. Her grandmother's oxygen payments. Her own impossible debt. All of it engineered in rooms like this, by men who've never touched a mop. Wesley takes the envelope back, his grease-stained fingers careful not to smudge the evidence. This is power, he corrects gently. Fraud is just the mechanism. The goal is control. Who gets care? Who gets blamed? Who disappears into the machine? He looks at her, and the tenderness in his gaze feels dangerous here, in this dark place. I need you to forget you saw this. For now. Why? Clara asks, though she knows the answer. Because she's already marked. Because one wrong move and her grandmother's oxygen stops flowing. Because the poor don't get justice, they get survival. Wesley doesn't answer. He seals the box and extinguishes the light, leaving them in darkness that feels like a promise. Or a threat. What price would you pay to keep breathing in a world that monetizes air? The anonymous donation appears on the ER wall at dawn, taped beside the duty roster where everyone must see it. A cashier's check for $50,000, made out to Patient Care Fund, no donor name, no return address. Just a note for those the system forgets. Clara discovers it during shift change, the paper crisp against the stained corkboard. The amount would cover her grandmother's oxygen for years. It would clear the debts of half the intake ward. It exists like a miracle, impossible and bright, until Drake plucks it from the wall with 2 fingers and a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. How generous, he says, pocketing the check. Anonymous donors understand the value of discretion. Of proper channels. He looks at Clara specifically when he says channels, and she understands immediately. The donation isn't mercy. It's bait. Or it's evidence. Or it's both, wrapped in paper that burns fingerprints. By noon, the check vanishes from the ledger. Not cashed. Not deposited. Deleted, like the payment records, like Clara's alibi, like the poor who don't fit the donor narrative. Wesley hears about it in the loading dock, where he repairs a broken compressor while executives discuss optics above him. He doesn't react visibly. But his hand's still on the wrench. That night, Clara finds another envelope in her locker. No check this time. Just to print out her own login credentials, her home address, her grandmother's medical record number. And a handwritten note signing the correction. User error. Or the oxygen stops. She sits in the break room, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry wasps, understanding finally that she's not being framed by accident. She's being sculpted. Molded into the perfect scapegoat, poor enough to be believable as a thief, desperate enough to be coerced into confession. The anonymous donation was the first act. This is the second. Wesley finds her there, tears tracking through the grime on her face. He doesn't ask what's wrong. He sits beside her, close enough that their shoulders touch, and speaks to the wall ahead. There's a third option, he says softly. But it requires trusting someone you have every reason to doubt. Clara looks at his grease-stained hands, his steady gaze, his impossible calm in the face of her catastrophe. She thinks of the Dropbox, the creditor codes, the way he asks questions about finance with surgical precision. Who are you? She breathes. Wesley smiles, sad and knowing. Someone who owes this hospital more than a paycheck. Someone who intends to collect. What would you trust if every certainty was stolen except the stranger beside you? The correction form waits on Clara's supervisor's desk, a single page that would rewrite her reality. User error during system update, it reads. No malicious intent suspected. Recommend retraining, not termination. The words taste like copper and surrender. Signing means survival. Signing means complicity. Signing means becoming the lie they need. Her grandmother calls during lunch break, her voice thinned by oxygen deprivation and fear. The supplier says there's a hold on our account, baby. They won't deliver until Monday. I don't know if I can. Clara hears the machine beeping in the background, the rhythm of her grandmother's borrowed time running out. Drake finds her in the courtyard, smoking a cigarette she bought with coins from her locker. He doesn't smoke, but he carries a lighter platinum, engraved with the hospital's donor logo. Difficult choices, he says, offering fire she doesn't take. I admire your loyalty to the truth. But loyalty to family is more practical. The anonymous donation, Clara says, her voice ash. Where did it go? Drake's predator calm ripples, just slightly. Anonymous donations require verification. Protocol. I'm sure you understand protocols, Ms. Winslow. They exist to protect everyone. He steps closer, cologne masking something organic and hungry. Sign the form. Your grandmother breathes. You keep your job. The hospital maintains its reputation. Everyone wins. Except the truth, Clara whispers. The truth is a luxury, Drake replies, his hand brushing her shoulder in a gesture that feels like ownership. Luxuries are for donors. For people with options. He leaves the form on the bench beside her, a single pen placed with geometric precision. You have until midnight. After that, the oxygen supplier receives a different call. About creditworthiness. About risk. Clara sits in the courtyard until her cigarette burns to the filter. She thinks of Wesley in the maintenance closet, his careful hands, his impossible knowledge. She thinks of the Dropbox, the erased payments, the carousel of money that spins on the backs of the poor. At 11:47 p.m., she picks up the pen. But she doesn't sign. She writes one word in the margin: no. And she walks into the night, knowing she's just triggered something catastrophic, hoping she's not alone in the dark. What remains when you choose truth over breath? The stairwell between Bwing and the parking garage smells of rust and stale hope, a vertical tunnel where the hospital's class system sorts itself by floor. Clara finds Wesley there at 1:00 a.m., sitting on a concrete step, his maintenance cart blocking the door below. He's been waiting. Or watching. Or both. I didn't sign, she says, collapsing beside him, her scrub still smelling of the teenager's blood from 3 nights ago. The confession feels like a bullet she's fired into her own future. Wesley nods, not surprised. I know. I watched The Office. He turns to face her, and in the emergency lighting his features look carved from something harder than flesh. You just declared war on people who don't lose wars. Do you understand that? I understand that my grandmother might die because I have principles, Clara says, the anger finally breaking through her exhaustion. I understand that you know things you shouldn't know, and you won't tell me why. I understand that I'm alone in this except for a maintenance man who fixes lights and asks questions about creditor codes. Wesley reaches into his coveralls, produces a photograph of a young woman in a nurse's uniform, decades ago, standing in front of this same hospital. My mother, he says. She worked intake, like you. She noticed patterns, like you. She refused to sign forms, like you. He pauses, his steady gaze fixed on the image. She died in a supply closet. Accidental overdose, they ruled it. She didn't use drugs. She used truth. Truth was her addiction. Clara takes the photograph, the paper warm from his body heat. The woman's smile looks like Wesley's reserved, knowing, dangerous. What happened? The hospital settled with the family. Quietly. A donation to a fund that doesn't exist, administered by Drake's predecessor. Wesley's voice stays soft, but something sharp moves beneath it. I was 12. I grew up in the system that killed her. I learned its machinery. I became maintenance everywhere, nowhere, invisible with purpose. He meets her eyes. Until now. Until you. The confession hangs between them, fragile and radioactive. Clara feels the danger of it, the way tenderness becomes liability when power is watching. She reaches for his hand, her fingers finding his grease-stained ones, the contact electric and terrifying. "What happens now?" she asks. "Now we become dangerous together," Wesley says, his thumb tracing her palm in a gesture that's half promise, half warning. "Now we finish what my mother started. But you need to know if they connect us, if they see this, they'll use it. They'll say you seduced me into sabotage. They'll say we're both criminals. The truth won't matter." Clara tightens her grip. "Then we make sure the truth is undeniable. Can love survive when holding hands is an act of treason?" The planted audit note appears on Clara's personnel file within 48 hours, a digital scarlet letter that precedes her through every corridor. "High-risk financial irregularities," it reads. "Recommend exclusion from payment systems, donor contact, executive access." She's been quarantined, professionally leprous, contagious with poverty. She learns about it when her keycard fails at the donor wing elevator, the red light blinking like a pulse. Security arrives not with violence but with paperwork, a man in a polyester uniform who apologizes while confiscating her access. "System flag," he explains, not meeting her eyes. "Nothing personal. Just protocol." But it is personal. The flag was planted by Drake's office, seated in metadata that shows her erratic behavior, the refusal to sign, the stairwell meeting captured on camera, her login attempts to access her own erased records. The poor are framed with their own desperation, their own survival instincts turned into evidence of criminality. Wesley sees the security footage before it's scrubbed, his maintenance access allowing him into the monitoring room during a routine check of the recording equipment. He watches himself and Clara on the stairwell, the hand-holding, the promises. The timestamp. The camera angle that makes them look conspiratorial rather than intimate. Someone edited the sequence. Someone prepared this. He finds Clara in the parking garage, sitting in her car that won't start, battery dead, terminals corroded with precision. "They've started the narrative," he says, sliding into the passenger seat, his presence illegal and necessary. "By next week, you'll be the face of hospital fraud. The scapegoat they sacrifice to calm the donors. And you?" Clara asks, her voice hollow. "What do they say about you?" "Nothing yet. I'm still invisible. But that changes when I move." Wesley pulls a folded paper from his coveralls, a subpoena template, blank, ready. "I need to access the sealed donation records. The real ones, not the public ledger. It's in Drake's private server, biometric lock, air-gapped from the main system." "Impossible," Clara breathes. "Difficult," Wesley corrects. "But I know the contractor who installed the biometric system. I know the backup codes. I know because I helped build this hospital's infrastructure, literal and financial, before I became maintenance." He pauses, letting the implication settle. "What I don't know is if I can trust myself to stay controlled. When I see his files, when I see what they did to her, I might become the violence they expect from the poor." Clara starts her car with jumper cables from Wesley's cart, the engine catching with a sound like defiance. "Then we stay controlled together," she says. "We become the discipline they can't predict." But as they drive into the night, a sedan follows at careful distance, its headlights off until the last moment. Someone is always watching when the poor organize. What grows in the shadow of a lie that feeds on the helpless? Drake's office occupies the hospital's penthouse, a glass cathedral where the city sprawls below like a circuit board of conquered territory. He receives Clara there at noon, the invitation delivered by security escort that felt more like arrest. Protection, he calls it, pouring coffee she won't drink. "I'm concerned for your well-being, Ms. Winslow. The stress. The accusations. The unfortunate associations." He displays photographs on his desk, Wesley entering the monitoring room, Wesley in the maintenance closet with the Dropbox, Wesley and Clara in the stairwell with their hands intertwined. Each image is dated, sequenced, narrative ready. Your maintenance friend has been busy, Drake says, his predator calm undisturbed by the evidence of his own surveillance. Sabotaging systems. Accessing restricted areas. Conspiring with staff to undermine donor confidence. He's investigating the erased payments, Clara says, her voice steadier than her pulse. The anonymous donation that disappeared. The fraud you're hiding. Drake laughs, a sound like coins dropping into velvet. Fraud is a word for people without attorneys. I have 12 on retainer. I have regulators who owe me favors. I have a press conference scheduled tomorrow where I will express my deep sorrow about isolated incidents involving temporary staff. He leans forward, his immaculate suit absorbing the light. But I offer you protection, Clara. Sign a statement naming Wesley as the saboteur. Describe his coercion, his manipulation, his threats against your family. Become the victim instead of the accomplice. My grandmother, Clara whispers, understanding the architecture of this trap. Will receive a lifetime oxygen supply, paid in full, delivered to her door. Private nursing. Comfort. Dignity. Drake slides a pen across the marble desk, a different pen than before, heavier, more permanent. Or she receives nothing. And you receive charges. Financial fraud. Patient data theft. Conspiracy. The poor always believe they'll be the exception, the one who escapes the machinery. They never are. Clara looks at the pen, at the photographs, at the city below where people are dying in rooms she can't access anymore. She thinks of Wesley's mother's smile, of the stairwell promise, of the Dropbox secrets. The choice isn't between truth and lies. It's between two kinds of death, fast with prison, or slow with complicity. I need time, she says, standing, her legs unsteady but upright. You have until the press conference, Drake replies, not standing, already victorious. After that, the narrative sets like concrete. Irreversible. Public. Humiliating. He sips his coffee, watching her leave. Bring me Wesley, Clara. Or become him. The elevator descends like a coffin closing, carrying her toward a decision that will define whether she's human or merely surviving. What remains of you when survival requires becoming the weapon? The sealed envelope arrives via courier, addressed to Department of Patient Advocacy Department that was dissolved 3 years ago during budget cuts. Clara receives it because she's the only one left who remembers the department existed, who cared enough to keep the mailbox checked. The stamp reads priority. The return address is a law firm she's never heard of. Inside a single page, a creditor authorization code, and a photograph. The code matches the pattern Wesley found in the Dropbox, repeating across unrelated accounts like a signature. The photograph shows a construction site, 15 years past, groundbreaking for the hospital's current wing. In the corner, barely visible, a young man in work boots holds a blueprint. His posture is familiar. His steady gaze is unmistakable. Wesley. Clara finds him in the sub-basement, repairing a steam line that hasn't functioned properly since the building opened. She doesn't speak. She shows him the photograph, the code, the impossible connection between the maintenance worker and the hospital's foundation. Wesley's hand still on the valve wrench. His controlled anger finds new expression: recognition, resignation, readiness. You weren't supposed to find that yet, he says, not denying, not explaining. I wasn't supposed to find any of this. The Dropbox. The timestamp fraud. The fact that my maintenance man knows more about creditor law than the finance director. Clara's voice rises, echoing off concrete walls that have absorbed decades of secrets. Who are you, Wesley? Really? Because you're not poor. You're not powerless. You're something else entirely, and am drowning in your secrets while you watch from the shore. Wesley sets down the wrench. He produces a key, old, brass, worn smooth by years of handling. This opens a safety deposit box at First National. Box 714. It contains loan documentation, original creditor agreements, the financial foundation this hospital stands on. He pauses, his steady gaze meeting hers without flinching. I'm the primary creditor behind the construction loan that built this wing. I've owned this building longer than Drake has managed it. I became maintenance to protect my investment from inside, where the rot spreads, where the poor suffer, where my mother died. The revelation lands like a physical blow. Clara steps back, her shoulder blades hitting the cold pipe behind her. You're rich, she accuses, the word tasting like betrayal. You're one of them. I'm one of us, Wesley corrects, his voice still soft, still dangerous. I was born poor. I earned wealth through work that Drake's kind would never recognize: real labor, real risk. And I used it to buy debt. Hospital debt. The power to foreclose, to expose, to destroy. He steps closer, his grease-stained hands reaching for hers. But I can't act openly. If Drake discovers the creditor's identity, he'll trigger default clauses, political pressure, regulatory capture. I need to stay invisible until the evidence is undeniable. Until the anonymous donation can be authenticated without revealing its source. Clara understands finally: the 50,000, the erased ledger entry, the carefully planted trail. You're the anonymous donor. I'm one of several, Wesley says. But yes. And tomorrow, at the press conference, Drake will use your refusal to sign against you. He'll humiliate you publicly to prove the system's integrity. Unless we have the sealed envelope authenticated, witnessed, entered into record before he speaks. The steam line hisses behind them, pressure building, waiting for release. Clara holds the key so tight it leaves marks. What happens if we fail? Then you become the lie that protects the rich, Wesley says. And I become the creditor who let another poor woman die in this building. I won't survive that, Clara. Not as a person. Not as my mother's son. What price do you pay for power that must remain invisible to be effective? Wesley traces the repeating donor codes through the hospital's backup servers, accessed through a maintenance terminal that shouldn't have administrative rights. But he built the network, 15 years ago, when the wing was new and his mother was still alive. He left himself doors that no audit would find, tunnels through the architecture that survive renovation after renovation. The codes tell a story: wealthy donors contributing to a patient care fund that exists only on paper. The money cycles through shell accounts, emerging as billing adjustments for select patients: those with political connections, those who can return favors, those whose survival serves the hospital's optics. Meanwhile, the poor receive user errors and system updates that erase their payments and deepen their debt. Clara works parallel, using her remaining access to pull records that shouldn't be retrievable. Files marked deleted that persist in backup shadows. She finds her own erased login, the 2:47 a.m. timestamp, the digital fingerprint that proves her innocence and, more importantly, proves the erasure was targeted, automated, part of a system rather than a mistake. They meet in the chapel at 3:00 a.m., the only space in the hospital without cameras. Wesley's contribution to the original design, a single blind spot where the poor could pray without being watched. Drake knows him investigating, Wesley says, spreading printouts across the altar like offerings to a vengeful God. He's increased security on the finance floor. Biometric scanners activated. The sealed envelope is still in the deposit box, Clara finishes. We need it before the press conference. We need authentication, a witness, a chain of custody that Drake can't corrupt. Wesley nods, his grease-stained fingers pointing to a pattern in the codes. Look here. Every major donation corresponds to a billing erasure. The money flows in, the debt flows out, but not for the patients. For the donors. They're buying zero-balance statements for their preferred poor, while the rest of us drown in compound interest. Clara sees it now: the carousel Wesley described, the machinery of mercy that grinds the desperate into profit. The anonymous donation, your donation, it broke the pattern. It was meant for the poor without strings, without billing adjustments, without donor control. And that's why Drake hid it, Wesley says. Unconditional help is the most dangerous thing in a system built on conditional power. It proves that care doesn't require wealth. It proves that the poor can receive without owing. A sound from the corridor, footsteps, careful, professional. They freeze, pressed together in the dark, their breath synchronized, their evidence gathered like armor. The footsteps pass. But someone knows they're close. Someone is always close when the truth gets heavy. "We have 12 hours, Wesley whispers against her hair, the contact electric and necessary. 12 hours to authenticate a donation, expose a fraud, and survive the humiliation Drake has planned. Are you ready to be seen?" Clara thinks of her grandmother's oxygen machine, beeping in the dark across town. "I'm ready to be undeniable." But as they separate, gathering their papers into waterproof bags, a shadow moves in the confessional booth behind them. Someone has been listening. Someone always listens when the poor find their voice. What echoes in the silence after the powerful realize they've been heard? The record Clara pulls shouldn't exist. It's marked for destruction in the system logs, scheduled for overwrite in the next backup cycle, preserved only because she accessed it through a terminal in the morgue. Wesley's suggestion, a place where the living fear to tread and the dead keep their secrets. It shows the donation fund's true structure, not charity but leverage. Every contribution creates a corresponding debt, a chain of obligation that binds the hospital to donor interests. Patient care becomes secondary to donor reputation. The fund doesn't heal, it hunts. Wesley studies the document in the morgue's cold light, his breath visible, his steady gaze fixed on figures that confirm his mother's suspicions from 15 years ago. "She found this," he says, his voice carrying in the refrigerated silence. "She was going to expose it. That's why they put her in the supply closet. That's why they made it look like an overdose." Clara places her hand on his shoulder, the contact grounding them both in the presence of death and truth. "We have the proof. The repeating codes. The authenticated donation metadata. The sealed envelope waiting at the bank." She pauses, the reality of their position crystallizing in the cold. But Drake has the platform. He has the press conference. He has the narrative ready while we have facts hidden in morgue terminals and safety deposit boxes. "We have something else," Wesley says, turning to face her, his controlled anger finally finding direction. "We have timing. The press conference is at 2:00 p.m. The bank opens at 9:00 a.m. We can authenticate the envelope, establish the chain of custody, and enter the atrium as Drake is beginning his performance." He touches her face, his grease-stained fingers warm against her chilled skin. "But once we step into that light, there's no retreat. Hell attack immediately. Hell use everything, our relationship, my identity, your grandmother's medical records. Hell try to humiliate us before we can speak. Let him try," Clara says, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We've been invisible our whole lives. Poor, overworked, overlooked. Today we become visible. Today we make them see what their machinery does to real people." They leave the morgue with the record secured in 3 locations: physical copy, encrypted upload, and photographic memory. The hospital wakes around them, the day shift arriving, the donor tour preparing, the atrium being arranged for its performance of power. Somewhere above, Drake rehearses his speech, the accusation that will make Clara the face of fraud, the scapegoat that protects the wealthy. But Wesley carries the key to box 714, and Clara carries the knowledge that her timestamp was manufactured, her guilt assigned, her poverty weaponized. They move through the corridors as they've always moved, separately, invisibly, beneath the notice of power, until they reach the bank at 9:03 a.m., and the world begins to change. The teller recognizes Wesley, her eyes widening at the name on the account. "Mr. Hargrove," she says, the honorific foreign after years of maintenance, and "Hey you. Your box requires dual authentication. The secondary party was here at 8:45 a.m. She's waiting in the private room." Clara freezes. Secondary party. They told no one. Planned with no one. Unless. The private room door opens. A woman in regulatory commission attire holds the sealed envelope, already opened, already authenticated, her badge identifying her as State Health Investigator. "Ms. Winslow," she says. "Mr. Hargrove. I've been waiting 15 years for someone to retrieve this box. Your mother was my informant, Wesley. And today, we finish her work." What emerges when the hidden witnesses finally step into the light? The atrium shimmers with borrowed glory, crystal chandeliers reflecting off marble floors that have never known blood. News cameras cluster like feeding organisms, their lenses hungry for the narrative Drake has prepared. He stands at the podium in his immaculate suit, predator calm perfected, the hospital logo glowing behind him like a religious icon. Today, he begins, his voice carrying the practiced sincerity of televangelists and politicians. "We must address troubling irregularities in our patient financial systems. Irregularities that threaten the trust our donors place in us. Irregularities involving a temporary staff member who abused access for personal gain." The screen behind him illuminates with Clara's face, her badge photo enlarged to accusatory scale. "Clara Winslow," Drake intones, "intake receptionist, accessed confidential payment records, erased donor contributions, and attempted to redirect funds to personal accounts." Her login credentials confirm her presence at 2:47 a.m. during the system update that deleted 300 patient payment histories. The crowd murmurs, donors shifting in their gilt chairs, journalists recording every word. "We have terminated her employment, secured her access, and are cooperating fully with authorities. But I want to emphasize this is an isolated incident. A single bad actor in a system that otherwise functions with integrity and compassion." Clara enters from the side door, Wesley beside her, the State Health Investigator 3 steps behind. They are not announced. They are not expected. They are poor people walking into a cathedral of wealth, and the air itself seems to resist their presence. Drake falters, just slightly, his predator calm rippling. "Security," he says into the microphone, the word broadcast to every camera. "Please remove these individuals. This is a private press conference regarding ongoing personnel matters." But the investigator holds up her badge, the state seal catching the chandelier light. "This is now a regulatory proceeding, Mr. Hollowell. Ms. Winslow has filed a complaint alleging billing coercion, donation fund manipulation, and retaliatory framing. I am authorized to investigate. These individuals are complainants, not trespassers." The cameras turn, lenses refocusing, narrative fracturing. Drake recovers, his smile reassembling itself. "Desperate people make desperate claims," he says, gesturing to Clara as if displaying a specimen. Ms. Winslow was caught. Now she invents conspiracies to save herself. It's tragic, really. The poor always believe they're the exception. He clicks his remote. The screen changes Clara in the stairwell with Wesley, their hands intertwined, their faces close. She seduced a maintenance worker into accessing restricted areas. She used intimacy as a weapon against hospital security. This is not fraud, ladies and gentlemen. This is pathology. This is what poverty does to morality. The humiliation is surgical, public, designed to be irreversible. Clara feels the cameras eating her, feels the donors seeing her as Drake has framed her desperate, sexual, criminal. The whispers begin. The judgment solidifies. She is naked before power, and power is laughing. But Wesley steps forward, his grease-stained hands visible, his steady gaze fixed on Drake. "You want to talk about pathology?" he says, his soft voice somehow carrying to every microphone. "Let's talk about creditor codes. Let's talk about donation funds that launder reputations. Let's talk about a 50,000 anonymous contribution that appeared on the ER wall and vanished from your ledger because unconditional help threatens your control." He produces the authenticated envelope, the state investigator's seal gleaming. This contains the primary creditor authorization for the loan that built this wing. The loan Drake has been defaulting on for 3 years while manipulating patient billing to hide the shortfall. The loan held by a creditor he never bothered to identify because creditors are supposed to be rich, distant, uncaring. Drake's smile freezes. "You're a maintenance worker," he says, the words suddenly uncertain. "I'm the creditor you can't afford to anger," Wesley replies. And this press conference is over. What happens when the invisible owner of the house finally knocks on the door? The anonymous donation resurfaces with the force of authenticated truth, its metadata preserved through channels Drake never knew existed. The state investigator projects the documentation on the screen behind the podium. Wesley's $50,000 contribution, time-stamped, witnessed, entered into a parallel ledger that Drake's erasure couldn't touch. "Mr. Hargrove deposited this contribution 3 weeks ago," the investigator announces, her voice carrying the authority of subpoena power. "It was intended for the hospital's indigent care fund, with explicit instructions prohibiting donor identification or billing adjustment. Mr. Hollowell intercepted the donation, removed it from the official record, and subsequently used its absence to justify billing increases on low-income patients." The cameras capture Drake's face in high definition, the predator calm cracking into something feral and cornered. "This issue's not maintenance workers," don't the sentence fragments, Power's language failing when the foundation shifts. Clara steps to the microphone, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "My login was used at 2:47 a.m. to erase payment records. I was in triage, holding pressure on a bleeding patient. The timestamp was manufactured. The access was spoofed. And the pattern," she gestures to the projected record, shows 300 erasures, all corresponding to donor fund contributions, all creating unpayable debt for poor patients while zeroing balances for the wealthy. Wesley stands beside her, their shoulders touching, the intimacy that Drake tried to weaponize now transformed into solidarity. "The repeating donor codes," he says, pointing to the pattern on screen, "match the authorization sequence in my original construction loan. Drake has been using my creditor identification to mask fund manipulation. He thought the creditor was distant, uninvolved, rich enough not to care." The revelation cascades through the atrium. Donors stand, confused, their trust in the system fracturing. Journalists surge forward, questions overlapping. And Drake reaches for his phone, for his attorneys, for the power that has always answered his call. But the investigator holds up a second document. State Health Commission has issued an emergency injunction freezing all patient billing pending investigation. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit has been notified regarding the donation fund structure. And Mr. Hollowell, she turns to face him, her badge catching the light. "You are advised to retain counsel regarding charges of billing fraud, witness intimidation, and retaliatory personnel action." Drake's phone falls from his hand. The sound of plastic on marble echoes like a gunshot. He looks at Wesley, really looks, seeing for the first time the steady gaze that has watched him from below, from the maintenance tunnels, from the creditor's chair he never knew existed. "You planned this," he whispers. "For how long?" 15 years, Wesley says, his voice soft as ever, his controlled anger finally finding release. "Since you killed my mother in a supply closet and called it an overdose. Since you taught me that the poor are invisible until they become dangerous. I became maintenance to learn your machinery. I became a creditor to own your foundation. And today, I become the proof that you can't buy." The atrium empties of donors, of press, of the performance of power. Only the truth remains, authenticated and undeniable, glowing on the screen where Clara's accusation once hung. The humiliation has reversed. The scapegoat has become the witness. And the poor finally, terribly, beautifully have become visible. What remains standing when the machinery of lies finally stops grinding? The shock identity reveal arrives not with trumpets but with documents, the way all real power announces itself through paper trails, authenticated signatures, metadata that survives erasure. Wesley Hargrove, maintenance worker, grease under his nails, steady gaze fixed on the broken, stands revealed as the primary creditor behind the hospital's existence. The construction loan documentation fills the atrium screen. 15 years of payments, extensions, renegotiations, all held by Hargrove Holdings, an entity so buried in shell companies that Drake's due diligence never penetrated its surface. The signature on the original loan matches the initials on Wesley's maintenance timecards W. T. H. Wesley Thomas Hargrove, hidden in plain sight through the arrogance of power that assumes poverty means powerlessness. My mother died proving this hospital was built on fraud, Wesley says, his voice carrying to the last camera, the last witness, the last believer in the old order. I inherited her debt, financial and moral. I used the wealth I earned in construction, in real estate, in investments that Drake's class would never recognize as legitimate, to buy the leverage necessary to expose this system from within. He produces the final piece, the authenticated donation metadata, time-stamped, encrypted, unalterable. The 50,000 that appeared and vanished, now traced through blockchain verification, bank records, and the sealed envelope that survived 15 years in box 714. This donation was a test, Wesley explains. I wanted to see if unconditional help was possible in a system designed for conditional control. Drake proved it was not because he stole the money, but because he couldn't comprehend mercy without ownership. Clara stands beside him, her hand in his, their romance no longer liability but testimony. The state investigator confirms the planted audit notes, the manufactured timestamps, the retaliatory threats against Clara's grandmother, all documented, all illegal, all part of a pattern of billing coercion that extends across 6 years and 3,000 patients. Drake sits now, collapsed into a donor chair that cost more than Clara's monthly salary, his immaculate suit wrinkled, his predator calm dissolved into something small and frightened. You can't, he begins, but the sentence has no ending. Power has no vocabulary for its own collapse. Wesley turns to face him directly, their positions finally equal, finally honest. I don't want your job, Drake. I don't want your office or your suits or your performance of charity. I want this hospital to belong to the people who work in it, who bleed in it, who die in it. And starting today, it will, because I am foreclosing on your management contract, effective immediately, per the creditor rights you've been violating for 3 years. The legal mechanism is simple, public, irreversible. A state health regulator complaint, escalated to federal financial crimes, supported by authenticated documentation and witness testimony. The power reversal is complete. The creditor has entered his own house. And the maintenance worker has finally collected what he was owed. What does justice look like when it's been 15 years in the making? The public and legal power reversal unfolds with the inevitability of mathematics, each action triggering the next in a chain that Drake can no longer control. State regulators freeze the donation fund, seizing assets pending criminal investigation. Federal agents arrive within hours, their badges gleaming with the authority that money cannot purchase. The hospital's board, learning that their primary creditor has been mopping their floors for 15 years, convenes an emergency session that ends with Drake's termination and Wesley's installation as interim oversight director. But the victory is not clean. It is not painless. It is justice with an emotional scar. Clara's grandmother survives, the oxygen supply restored, the medical debt cleared, the threats against her care exposed as criminal coercion. But she will never forget the nights when her granddaughter's principles felt like abandonment. She will never trust the hospital that tried to kill her. The saved life carries the memory of the threat. Wesley stands in the atrium where his mother once smiled in photographs, where he became maintenance to become invisible to become powerful. The grease under his nails is finally washed away, but the stains remain in his memory, on his capacity for trust, on the 15 years he spent becoming what he hated to destroy what he hated more. He has won. He has lost himself in the winning. Clara finds him there at midnight, the atrium empty of cameras and donors, the chandeliers dimmed to emergency lighting. She doesn't speak of the future. She doesn't speak of the press coverage, the regulatory victory, the new policies being drafted in rooms they can now enter. She speaks of the stairwell where they first touched hands, the chapel where they hid, the morgue where they found truth among the dead. I don't know who you are now, she says, her voice honest and afraid. The maintenance worker who understood me. The creditor who saved us. The son who became his mother's revenge. Which one stays? Which one leaves? Wesley turns to her, his steady gaze unchanged despite everything changed around it. All of them, he says. None of them. I spent 15 years becoming a weapon. I don't know how to become a person again. But I want to learn. With you. In the light this time, not the stairwell shadows. They hold each other in the atrium where they were nearly destroyed, where power was reversed, where the poor finally became visible. The romance survives scarred, honest, changed. Love under threat becomes love under reconstruction, uncertain but chosen. Outside, the hospital continues its work. Patients arrive, rich and poor, now treated by a system that has been forced toward equity but hasn't achieved it. The machinery of mercy still grinds, but now it grinds slower, watched by regulators, owned by a creditor who remembers being poor. Drake faces charges that will take years to prosecute, his wealth buying time if not innocence. The donation fund is restructured, the anonymous contributions now traceable, the conditional mercy exposed as the fraud it always was. Justice arrives incomplete, delayed, expensive, but it arrives. Wesley and Clara walk out together, not into a perfect future, but into an honest one. The maintenance cart waits in the basement, abandoned. The creditor's key waits in his pocket, heavy. And somewhere in the city, a new hospital is being built, and a poor woman is noticing patterns, and the cycle threatens to begin again. But for now, in this moment, they have earned the right to be tired, to be uncertain, to be loved. The truth has been proven. The humiliation has been reversed. And the anonymous donation, once hidden, now stands as monument to what happens when the invisible refuse to disappear. What do you build after you've burned down the house that sheltered your grief? The machinery of mercy still turns, but now it turns watched, regulated, owned by those who remember what it cost to become visible. Wesley stands in his new office, his mother's old office, restored from storage where Drake had buried her memory, surrounded by construction blueprints and creditor agreements that finally align with patient care. He is no longer maintenance, no longer invisible, no longer safe in the shadows where revenge felt like purpose. He is a creditor who learned that owning the house is different from healing its wounds. Clara runs the intake desk that now bears her name, her grandmother's oxygen machine humming in the background of every decision she makes. She signs no forms she doesn't understand. She reports every timestamp that doesn't match reality. She loves Wesley not in stairwells but in daylight, their romance transformed from liability into foundation, not healed, not neat, but honest about the scars that make them useful to each other. They do not promise forever. They promise to witness. The hospital's atrium hosts no more press conferences about isolated bad actors. Instead, it hosts town halls where maintenance workers speak before donors, where patient debt is discussed as structural violence rather than individual failure, where the anonymous donation that started everything has been framed not as evidence, but as promise. A reminder that mercy can exist without ownership. That the poor can receive without owing their lives to the rich. Drake's trial begins next month, but the verdict that matters has already been delivered by regulators who froze his scheme, by journalists who exposed his carousel, by the poor who finally saw one of their own, not Wesley's wealth, but his poverty, his maintenance, his mother's death become undeniable. Justice arrived incomplete, expensive, delayed. But it arrived because people chose truth over breath, love over survival, visibility over safety. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself in Clara's refusal, in Wesley's patience, in the courage it takes to become visible when power prefers you hidden, then your voice matters. Like this video not for the algorithm, but for the others who need to know they're not alone in the machinery. Comment with the moment that made you feel seen, because community is how we survive what we cannot individually fix. Share this with someone who works in the invisible places, who knows the smell of the supply closet, who believes their truth is too small to matter. It isn't. It never was. This is part of a series about power, love, and the documentation that makes both visible. Binge the playlist for stories of medical billing fraud, of creditor secrets, of romances that become revolutions. Subscribe with notifications because the next story follows a nurse who discovers her hospital's donor fund is funding political campaigns and a maintenance worker who helps her trace the money to its source. The machinery keeps grinding. But so do we. Remember, they accused her of fraud until the anonymous donation proved the truth. What truth are you carrying that feels too heavy to reveal? The atrium is waiting. The cameras are ready. And somewhere, someone needs your voice to become undeniable.